Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and we're on episode 22 of Vinland Saga. Oh, this last week has been the longest week I've had to wait for this episode. We were talking about it in the Discord, and I was like, every week, Monday happens, I watch the episode, it comes out Tuesday on Patreon, and then YouTube, it comes out that same day as well. And then it feels like, the week just kind of goes along. But ever since episode 21, I was like, oh, I want 22 right now. And so this week has been so long to wait. It has just been a very long week. And I'm like, okay, show, anytime now. And so here we are, right? I've been waiting till it got a little bit darker outside for the lighting. And I've just been like, had the channel muted so I couldn't see anything on Discord. I've just been really, really excited for this episode and what it will entail, right? So I do have some comments before we start though, because these last few episodes, as has been the entire season of Vinland Saga Season 2, have been really, really good. And so I wanted to address them before we started. Forpaz noted that Snake and Olmar could be part of Thorfinn's Congregation of the True Warriors. I love Forpaz's name for it. It's like Thorfinn's Congregation of True Warriors. It sounds like a very religious group, right? But I feel like I agree. Olmar and Snake kind of fall in line ideologically a lot with Thorfinn, or they seem to be in a lot of ways on the same wavelength as Thorfinn. And I would argue that Canute is too. He just doesn't want to admit it, right? So I think that's really interesting. And then Thorfinn trying to practice. I like the way that Forpaz phrased this. They said Thorfinn tries to practice what he preaches, and Canute is wandering in the wilderness. It's a beautiful alliteration there, so thank you. The English teacher in me was very happy with that comment. I was like, yes, Thorfinn is trying his best to practice what he preaches, which has kind of been Thorfinn's MO the entire series. It's just his MO in season 1 was kind of compared to this season. And you'll have to excuse Huckleberry. There are some deer outside. In the last 20 minutes, he has been going crazy about them. So he may bark during this, so please forgive him. He knows not what he does. But besides that, I liked the idea of Canute wandering in the wilderness. Like, Canute doesn't really have a true path. He has this path he thinks he has to follow to get to his end goal, but his actions and speech that he gives to other people seems to almost be in contrast with it. Like, he doesn't really want to believe in what he's doing, but he thinks that the only way to get his end goal is to go about this way, which makes me want him to talk to Thorfinn, but who knows how that's going to go. Canute, the problem is Canute is a stubborn diva. That is the problem with Canute. He's a stubborn diva who thinks he's right. And it's either going to go one of a few ways. Either he's not going to listen to Thorfinn at all, and is just going to be like, whatever. Or he's going to listen to Thorfinn and be moved. That's probably the least likely scenario. Or he's going to listen to Thorfinn and try to tell Thorfinn how to do things, because that seems to be his little, that's the diva in Canute. So I don't know how that's going to go. With Einar there, who knows? I'm waiting for my love triangle to have a moment, and so we'll see if that ends up happening. A little dude pointed out that saving Arnheid with his speech, it became a priority when Thorfinn realized that she was once like him, where he didn't have the will to live. And I kind of like that. Like, we don't really understand the context of Thor's in the moment with the slave in season 1. We just assume that this has been Thor's ideology. And so the Vinland speech is something he tells the slave as he's dying, just that's part of his own dream and vision. But we don't really know. We get to know Thor's a little bit in season 1, but not like to the extent of Thorfinn. So for Thorfinn, we see where he's coming from when he starts his Vinland speech to Arnheid, because he wants to give her hope and inspire her like he's been inspired. And so that's really sweet. I thought that was a really, really good moment. And it explains a lot about Thorfinn's character, which is nice. Anita Meyer talks about how Canute, Olmar, and Thorfinn are all haunted by the deaths and the murders that they've committed. But I really liked Anita Meyer's point with this. Their motivations, in spite of it, change. Canute sees it as an unavoidable necessity. We have to kill people. It's part of the way the world works. We just have to accept it and move on. And he wants to avoid it, but he's kind of indifferent because it needs to be done for the paradise for warriors that he's making, which I thought the phrasing was really good on. Thorfinn sees death as part of Viking culture and that it's hard to avoid. But I would add to Anita's comment saying that, yeah, he believes it's part of Viking culture and it's hard to avoid, but he's taking the dead with him to remind him the weight of his sins, and he's actively trying to change the way the game is played. Thorfinn is like, I know this is how the culture works, I get it, but if I can change myself, maybe I can be part of changing the system. I really like that. And it reminds me a lot of inspirational people in real life where they're like, I can't change the system, but everything I do is a political act, right? Oddly enough, I was watching a clip of RuPaul today, of all things, from like 1993. He was on Arsenio Hall, and he was telling Arsenio Hall, he's like, any act that you do is a political statement, because even you expressing your own beliefs and yourself is making a statement. And that's kind of what Thorfinn's doing. He's making a political act by saying, I'm not going to fight because I don't believe in it for X, Y, and Z. So even though he's not actively trying to change people's minds necessarily, his actions are in fact a political statement that has changed Einar's mind, could change Snake's mind, may have an effect on Olmar if they talk. So, you know, and speaking of Olmar, the idea that he kind of mirrors Thorfinn in realizing that he is not, what's interesting about Olmar is he is not a part of Viking culture. He's like, I'm not a part of the culture, so I hate death and violence. I'm not a warrior. And he wants to show that it's not cowardly to be non-violent and to promote that. So I kind of love it. I love that Olmar and Thorfinn come at the same non-violent approach, but Thorfinn comes at it with the veteran experience of being a warrior, and Olmar comes at it from the experience of a citizen that's like, no, this is stupid. Let's not participate in this. So it's kind of interesting, right? So again, I'm very curious to see how everyone is going to get involved in this discussion. Like, is Olmar and Snake and them going to show up while Thorfinn's there? What's going to happen? I don't know. But I've been really, really, really excited to get to this point. If Thorfinn doesn't end up getting to speak to Canute, I'm going to be mad. I'm going to be like, no show. You don't build up this shit for an entire season and then not give it to us, right? So before I start, I do want to give a very quick shout out over to Patreon. Over on Patreon, I'm really grateful for everybody's support. Everyone's been super kind. They support me in doing these reactions and discussions, and they get onto the Discord. They help me select shows. Right now, we're actively doing, up until June 6th, we've been doing a thing on Patreon to try to find shows to replace Vinland Saga that have a similar tone. So that's what we're doing right now. So I'm going to be narrowing down, and Patreon is going to vote this next week on which show should replace Vinland Saga. So yeah, so hopefully y'all get a chance, if you get a chance to go on Patreon and be a part of that, that'll be awesome. But in the meantime, I wanted to give a shout out to the philanthropy tier over on Patreon because they are amazing and awesome. And those patrons that are in the philanthropy tier just give extra every month to help me do the things that I love and talk to you all about amazing series like this one. So a special shout out to Edgar, to Anime Annie, to Dana, to Nameless Monster, to Tyrone, to Shimoyama, to Be Happy, to Eric, to Sunspots, to Translucent Men, Alex Cornejo, as well as Isabel. Thank you all so very much for your support and kindness. I greatly appreciate it. All of my love. So yeah, I've waited all day, y'all. I've been patient and good. And now we're going to see what happens. So we are going to start episode 22 of Vinland Saga season 2. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. And cue the music, boys. Let's do. That was the best animated episode I've seen all year so far. Maybe. Yeah, no, what can I say that has not already been said in every comment, for every reaction, for every video presentation of this episode? That was a master tour de force of just taking a character arc and coming together, and then having these two characters clash, and it not going the way that you want it to, but it goes the way you thought it was going to, but then still leaving room. How dare they leave us on a cliffhanger? How dare they? Now I have to wait. I'm sure episodes 23 and 24 are going to be great. I'm very curious how they're going to round this season out, especially after Canute's conversation. But regardless of what happens from here on in, this episode was masterful. It was everything I wanted. It was, I can't put into words exactly how much I love Thorfinn. I can't put into words, right? I can't put into words how much I love his character. And the thing about it is, I feel like, I'm glad Einar went too, because I feel like you need Einar to emote and be there to say the things that needed to be said that Thorfinn's not good at articulating. And somebody had to be there to rein Einar in too. But this character, Thorfinn, coming from season 1 and us, I was one of them, complaining about his character being stagnant, complaining about how his character was just being a baka, being an idiot, and not learning from Askeladd, not learning from his surroundings. And for him this season to take the time, for the mangaka and the show to take the time to have him go through the depths of hell, do his soul searching, and come out and be the man that his father always wanted him to become. And yet, it's not over. There's still so much left to go. Like, Thorfinn realizes this episode, he's like, I wasn't even thinking about saving the Vikings. Like, he's just like, I said this at the end of the reaction. Thorfinn is one of those characters that I feel he needs to observe and see things and internalize them and compare them to himself and rationalize, and then he can make the comeback. He's not an improv guy. Thorfinn's not good at improv. He's a guy that needs to sit down and methodize everything and then come back with the perfect comeback. Oh my God, my heart was just like beating so fast watching this episode. That was everything I wanted it to be and more. That's a discussion. No, I brought my word Canute out because we have a lot to talk about, especially with Canute. And I'm not surprised by where it went. I'm surprised Canute put up with him as long as he did. I'm just going to say it. If Thorfinn wasn't so beat up within an inch of his life and looked a little bit hotter, maybe Canute would have taken him more seriously. No, I'm being funny. I'm joking. I don't think that would have mattered. Although, would have been nice for Canute to see Thorfinn at his best. Maybe that'll happen one day again. I think that Thorfinn is going to get away, right? But I don't know. I don't know. I'm so curious what's going to happen now. We have 2 episodes left of the season. I have no clue because I'm not a manga reader. I don't know where we're going to. It makes sense that this is the end of the Kettle Farm arc. Farmland Saga is ending with this season. But as to where they're going next, as to what's going to happen, I don't even know, man. I don't know. I'm going to be very curious the next 2 episodes to see the resolution of Canute and Thorfinn's conversation and to see where we go next. Because I don't think Thorfinn's defeated by Canute. No. I think Canute has lit a fire under Thorfinn, if anything. I don't know if Canute realizes what he's done, if I'm being honest. I think that Canute thought he was exerting his power, throwing his dick on the table and saying, I'm the king, the Viking of all Vikings. And Thorfinn's like, but what is a Viking? I feel like it's going to be one of those situations where Thorfinn just challenges Canute in what he's saying. Because Canute's speech leaves a lot of things to be desired and a lot of holes. And I think if Thorfinn thought about it enough, he could come up with a really good rebuttal. But now, doing that on the spot in front of all those troops, is he going to be able to combat with something that's going to let Canute let him go? Because here's the thing, Canute gives him the ultimatum. He's like, well, in order for you to stop me, you're gonna have to kill me. And I'm like, did you just not? Did Wolf not tell you that he just withstood 100 punches from a guy just to talk to you when he could have fought him? Did you not? And we'll talk about that with the whole knowing you thing and how that can kind of contradict and complicate the things happening. But the animation, the soundtrack, the themes, everything, I'll go ahead and just say this episode was absolutely amazing. It's my favorite of the season. Obviously, I love it for so many reasons. It's definitely my favorite so far. But I mean, I could gush about the episode, the animation, the voice acting, everything. I could gush about it all day, but you all have read that. We need to dive into this episode, talk about it, and break it down. And that's why Whiteboard Coon came out for this, because they're going to be needed. Oh my God. And the idea of it that Drott, or whatever his name is, that by the end of it, he's the one panting for breath. He's the one weakened from punching and exerting so much. I feel like that says something too to the idea of if you overexert all this violence over and over again, eventually you're going to wear yourself out. Eventually it's going to wear out, right? And that was kind of the point. And Thorfinn, I appreciate the things from season 1. Thorfinn did not just forget everything. I mean, he didn't just remember only the trauma from season 1. He remembered how to mitigate punches and damage. It's so interesting to see him take what Askeladd taught him and apply it, but in a way that is just Thorfinn's. It's not Askeladd's, it's Thorfinn's. I think that's so fascinating, and I love it. And I just love the idea of how Thorfinn, like the little tiny things that they did in this episode. Like every time you got a close up of Thorfinn, even if it was just his eyes or his hair, a glance, like he was just in the moment, and the emotion was so perfect with his character. And I absolutely loved it. So at this point, he's had 32 punches, right? And Wolf is like, wow, he's really. And Wolf figures out how he's able to withstand the blows. I'm so proud, and this is not a good thing to be proud of, I guess, but I'm so proud that people know Thorfinn and who he is. Like Thorfinn Kelfsani. Yeah, like Ulf knows. He's like, he's the guy that gave the cut to King Canute. He's the guy that stood up to Thorkel. Like, they actually know him, because that's been my one thing this entire season was, I was like, Thorfinn kind of like was. What's ironic is that Canute's voice actor plays Kuroko from Kuroko's Basketball, but Thorfinn's kind of been like a phantom man himself. Like, he was in Askeladd's army, but he was always like, he was doing these kind of famous things, like taking on Thorkel, right? And I always was like, did nobody remember him? I mean, he kind of stood out as this feral little wolf child. He was pretty memorable, even if he was just one note in season 1. And so I kept wondering if people would remember him. And everybody was really quiet in the comments. Nobody was like, oh, I don't know. But I'm glad that Wolf confirms that, yes, people did remember him. He kind of has a little bit of a legacy behind him. He was the one that took on Thorkel and could take him in a fight. And like that word, that legacy has kind of like continued. So that does a number of things. It shows us that Thorfinn, son of Thors, is someone that the Vikings will recognize in the future. If Wolf remembered him, chances are there's going to be other Vikings remember him, right? And Einar's there to spread the word. Snake is there to spread the word. Olmar's there to spread the word. The congregation of the true warriors is going to get spread, right? I just, that makes me so happy, because I'm like, I feel like you have to earn a name. Like, the Vikings are all about names. They're all about legacy. They're all about namesake, right? Kettle just borrowed Iron Fist Kettle for himself, and nobody did a background check. Everybody just treated it like a Facebook post and thought it was factual. Nobody did their research, but that's all it took. You just had to own up and say it was you. And so Thorfinn, that may come to his benefit in the future if people remember who he is and they're like, he's the one that gave the scar on the king's cheek. He's the one that stood up to Thorkel. He's the one that withstood 100 punches from the bear killer Draught, right? I mean, that's going to be stuff. By the time Thorfinn takes that beating, every man in that circle, all of those Thanes, all of those, well, they're not Jomsvikings that are there. Floki and his men are not there, interestingly enough. Floki and his men are not there, which is curious. I'm wondering if Canute's going to tell Floki about him later, or if Wolf is. I could see Canute doesn't seem like the type to gossip with Floki, because I don't think Canute likes Floki. So Wolf probably will be the one to tell, be like, oh yeah, Thorfinn, he was like, you know, son of Thor's. Or Draught will say it, and then Floki will be like, oh shit, Thor's kid is here. You know. But that's the thing. I feel like this moment of Thorfinn taking those 100 punches, that's going to become like legend. That's going to be something those Vikings tell their friends and tell their comrades and tell people they meet. They'd be like, did you hear about Thorfinn? The man that took 100 punches from the bear killer and went and stood up and talked to the king himself. Like, that's he's a true warrior. Like, that is going to ripple throughout the Viking culture, which now that Canute has mentioned saving Vikings, Thorfinn's going to be like, I didn't even think about that. I've got a new MO. It's like, you know, that's the thing. I just feel whatever the outcome of this is, that it will only in the long run benefit Thorfinn. And I could be wrong. Could very well be wrong. But I feel like it's only going to benefit Thorfinn. The acts that he took in this episode are things that are going to have a ripple effect and stand out and cause a stir, right? Because in season 1, Thorfinn, just being a feral wolf child, he was no different than any other Viking. Like, you could say, oh, he was fighting in the Askeladd's army, and they'll be like, yeah, so was 200 other guys. What makes him stand out? But for him to be a warrior and not fight at all, like, it's making Thorfinn stand out. It's making him noticeable. And that may become something that if Canute lets Thorfinn go and thinks Thorfinn is insignificant, and lets him go, and suddenly Thorfinn starts to gain some momentum, and some people start to be like, oh, this Thorfinn. Canute may come to regret that and be like, why did I do that? What did I do? I like this story of Canute and Thorfinn going from acquaintances to comrades to enemies. It's sort of like the opposite of enemies to lovers. They started out on their little date on a cart and eating rabbit dinner stew with Ragnar, and now they're enemies, right? But they're not enemies because Thorfinn has no enemies. We're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about that when we get to it. Oh my god, I just was and Einar this whole damn episode. Can we talk about him? Einar this whole episode was like, had glistening eyes, like even Snake at one point did. I was like, boys, there's enough Thorfinn to go around for everyone. I was not expecting my OT3 to become Snake, Einar, and Thorfinn. But I'll take it, especially when Canute's being an asshole. I'll take it. But yeah, like Einar's eyes were glistening. I'm like, I get it, y'all. I know y'all. Y'all are like, no, Thorfinn and Einar are just bros. They're just like brothers in arms. There's nothing romantic. Let me have this. I don't get to ship at all in Vinland Saga. The last ship I had, they're both dead, so give me something. Let me have this. So Einar was just had sparkly eyes, like googly eyes, like half the episode, which was fine by me because, and I understand, I ship for fun, right? I understand that Einar and Thorfinn are just bros, they're best friends, but let me indulge myself just a wee bit because my ship of Canute and Thorfinn, it's an angsty ship right now. It's not fully set in sail. It's parked in the dock, right? And Canute won't let us put the sails out. But man, what I didn't expect was for Olmar and Snake to show up. I did not expect that till the end of the episode, if I'm being honest. I thought that Snake and Olmar were going to show up like at the end of the episode or into episode 23. I didn't think they'd actually be here to see the fight, right? But again, Thorfinn is creating his congregation of true warriors. And what better two people to watch Thorfinn's actions than Snake, who has kind of been teetering on the same values as Thorfinn. He's just been kind of tsundere about it, not telling us. And Olmar, who Thorfinn is going to be like, oh my god, yes, this guy is exactly what I'm talking about. Someone else is thinking the same thing I am. I have not noticed that Thorgil was not present at all in this episode. It has not escaped me that Thorgil has vanished. Is he going to try something at the last minute? Probably. Is he going to try to get Kettle and get him out of there? Who knows? But it's not lost on me that Thorgil was not present in this entire episode, and I think that was intentional to make the audience... There are so many badass things happening in this episode that I'm sure the audience has forgotten about Thorgil, and that's the mangaka's intention. We're supposed to forget about him. He's going to come back, at least by the finale, I'm sure, and try to do something. And I don't think it'll be successful, but you do you, Thorgil. You do you. Snake had some interesting expressions, too. Like, he had some, like, little sparkly eye expressions, like, Thorfinn, what are you doing? Like, just like... you know what? Back in season 1, I remember I was telling people, I was like, oh, Thorfinn and Canute as a ship. And there were a couple commenters that were like, that's not my Thorfinn ship, but okay. And I was like, who the hell else will we ship Thorfinn with? And now there's like 3 guys I can ship him with, right? It could be Einar, it could be Snake, it could be Canute, whatever. I love that. I love back then everybody was like, well, I mean, you could. And I'm like, and you know, you could not have told me in episode 22 of season 1 that this arc of Thorfinn was going to happen. Could not have told me. I would not have believed you at all. And I was fully ready to make this video with Thorfinn and Eren Yeager and Light Yagami, and now I'm like, oh, we'll need to substitute Thorfinn out with Canute. Substitute him, make a whole new video, whole new thing. But I really love Thorfinn's character. And he's become a man. He's grown up before our eyes. I feel like I'm wiping away a tear and sending him off to college. And it's only been 4 years since the events of episode 24 of season 1. And he was, what, 17 at that time? So he's like 21. Like, our boy's old enough to drink and cause a political stir in the age of Denmark Vikings. I'm like, Thorfinn, my dude. He said he'll trade 100 punches. I really love just Snake's concern. I mean, Olmar's concern was expected because Olmar's just like, oh my god. But Snake's concern for Thorfinn is beautiful in this episode. And I'm going to be really sad if this is the last we see of Snake and Olmar at the end. I want Snake and Olmar to go with them. Olmar ain't tied down to no lady. Snake's got his men, but Snake's got Fox and Badger. Maybe they can come too. I'm like, get the congregation of true warriors and let's go. I really, at this point, I don't know what's going to happen with Olmar and them, right? Because when we go through Canute's speech that he gives, and that's mainly why I brought Whiteboard Canute out for Canute's speech, I don't know if Olmar... I could see Olmar sticking around because it's his obligation as owner of Kettle's farm. He's going to stick around. But Canute said they'd be outcast. That's kind of the weird thing about it, is Canute was like, oh, we're going to be outlawing you. We're going to exile you for outlawry. But then I'm like, you wanted the farm and the people in it because they know how to run it. Wouldn't you want Kettle and his family because they know how it works and they know who works with who and what does what? Wouldn't you need the family in order to keep the system afloat? Otherwise, that kind of defeats the purpose of not just going in. It's kind of fake. It's a little bit hypocritical what Canute does in this, because he's at one end he's like, oh, back at Denmark, he was like, oh, well, we need Kettle and his family just to surrender so we can take them in as assets and they know how to run the farm. He tells Floki, he's like, we can't just barge in and kill everybody, we need to save them. But then I'm like, is he gonna... But then he's talking about like outlawing Kettle and his family and banishing them, and I'm like, didn't you need them to run the farm, Canute? So I'm going to be very interested. I feel like we'll get to Canute's part because he has a whole big thing and there's lots of things with it. So I don't want to get the cart ahead of the horse, right? But I'm interested in what's going to happen with Snake. Like Olmar, I could see staying with his family because he doesn't want to abandon them. I kind of want him to. I kind of want him to leave the family and go with Thorfinn and be like, hey, go with Thorfinn. Because I think Olmar's character is fascinating and I think there's more to him that we could do. But if this season's all we get of Olmar, so be it. Or if he's one of those characters, if the mangaka doesn't bring a character back till way later, fine, whatever. But I don't want this to be the end of Snake at this season. I feel like we just get to know Snake and just get to start with him. I want Snake to go with them. I want Snake to join them on their journey and become a member of the Congregation of the True Warriors. I want Snake to do that too. But a part of me thinks that Snake's not going to do that because he doesn't want to leave his men because he's loyal and shit. And the other part of me is like, he doesn't want to leave Kettle's farm because he owes the debt of being able to stay there and freeload. And he doesn't want to leave Spherical because, well, I don't know. I'm really sad. If this is all we get of Snake for now, I'm going to be really sad if he doesn't extend over to season 3, but what can we do, right? I find his character fascinating and I want to know more about him, so I don't know. But yeah, I was really sad for a minute because I thought that this was going to be the end at like the 32 punches, that Thorfinn wasn't going to be able to stand up, that they were going to end it. I was fully expecting like a number of things to happen. I thought that Snake and Olmar would try to use their power as the owners and main protector of Kettle's farm to get Thorfinn to go see Canute. I thought maybe Wolf would be like, hey, you did enough, let's go see Canute, or leave, and Olmar and Snake were going to go see Canute. I was fully preparing myself for the episode to end without... What we got was the best possible scenario of Thorfinn sitting up. But I'm not gonna lie, y'all. Look, I ain't gonna lie. Snake is like, what is he doing? And he's like, he's enduring 100 punches. And he's like, Einar, he'll die if he doesn't go. And then, of course, Olmar's just sitting there stunned. But I'm sorry, y'all. Look. I know that Thorfinn looks like Viking Jesus right now with his hair and his beard and everything. And his messed up face. But that moment where Snake is like holding Thorfinn in his arms and Einar's crouched beside him, you can not ship or whatever, but you can't tell me that's not a moment of, there's something there. There's something you can work with. I could work with that. I was like, I was not expecting this kind of OT3, but I'll take it. Mm-hmm. Cheers, I'll take it, because Canute is not dealing with either of them. And I'm like, Canute, my dude. But the thing that gets me is that he's like, we've already tried. He says, we've already tried to talk our way out of this and it wasn't going to work. And what I love is that Thorfinn says, are you sure about that? Did you really try to talk? Because they didn't. That was the thing. When Snake said, we've already tried to talk our way out of this, I was like, no, you haven't. No, when they showed up, like, Kettle was getting a mob together. Like, they did not go sit with Canute in the tent and have a powwow. No, they instantly raised up arms and prepared for battle. And Canute offered them the chance to surrender. They could have gone and talked then, but they didn't. Now, granted, based on what we've seen here, it wouldn't have probably done any good. right? It would not have probably mattered because Canute seems to not, Canute ain't here to make friends, right? Canute's not here for that. So it probably would have made no difference. But I think the point is that Snake was trying to say, well, we had no choice. We had to immediately take up arms. And Thorfinn's like, you had lots of choices and you just didn't act on them. And that's why we're here. So whether or not they would have been successful is an entirely different question. I don't think it would have been either way. But Thorfinn's like, you didn't even try. He's like, that's the thing. He's like, I'm going to try and do this my way. And it's just, I love that he just stands up. And I love that Snake and Einar are like, are you kidding? And he's like, did you really try to resolve this through conversation? I don't think you did. He's like, once they drew their swords, you merely answered with your own blades without thinking. I love that we can't see his eyes during that shot. The hair's all in the way, but you can tell that Thorfinn's just angry. And Thorfinn, what I love about this moment and what I love about Thorfinn's character is Thorfinn's pacifism is not treated as something soft. It's not treated as something weak. It's not treated as something that just subtly happens. Thorfinn pushes his hair back and says, I'm a busy man. I got bitches to see. Let's get this over with. And I love that for the first time, we've seen it hinted at throughout the season, but for the first time, we really see Thorfinn's anger channeled into this controlled state. And it felt so much like Thor's, but it was Thorfinn. It was beyond Thor's. That was what was so beautiful about it, because Thor's came across as the father figure that's just like, you know, it has the dad energy, and he's like, don't worry, son, everything's gonna be okay. And Thorfinn's just like, no, it's gonna be okay. Like, I love that Thorfinn takes that feral energy and channels it into something mature and polished, and it's just so good. I'm like, yes! Oh my God. You just savor it. And all of those men instantly know. And he just spits out the teeth. Because Thorfinn's lost some teeth before. You know, dental back then in the day is a whole different thing. But Thorfinn just spits them teeth out like he don't even care. Good thing they were molars, right? And he says, why are you standing there, middle part? I love that he's had to endure a lot these last 2 episodes. He's been called Shorty, Shrimp, and he's just like, oh, fuck this. And he's just like, okay, middle part. I love that's the one thing he teases him on is his hair. Why are you just standing there? And everybody's like, your fists hurt less than being bitten by a bug. God, I love it. He's like, 68 more, get it over with. I'm like, fuck yeah, I'm a busy man. People are waiting for me. When he lifts the hair up and it's that feral face, but it's just all channeled there in that adult form, I can't put into words how much I love it. I could stare at that screenshot all day. Probably will. And those eyes, those feral eyes, like we've seen them all of season 1, but they just come back. And it's just like, it's the face of a damn man. This show is so manly, and I love it. It's like the manliest show I've watched on this channel. But it's manly in like, not a misogynistic or any weird way. It's like, you just want to go chop some wood. After you watch it, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. And all those guys are like, we're really doing this. Okay, mad respect, sir. And yeah, Drote's like, what? Oh. And I love that Snake's like, this battle's already, but Einar's like, let my boyfriend go. He's like, if he keeps this up, he'll die. And Einar's like, look, I've been working with this guy for about a year now. You ain't gonna stop him. Once he gets them feral eyes and once he gets that tone in his voice, you're not stopping him. So just let him do this. Like, I like that Einar's grip on Snake is kind of like him saying, look, Thorfinn's a man. He's an adult. He can choose his path. Don't disrespect him. Like, that would be like, don't insult his dignity in this moment. Like, he is like dropping his balls on the table and just saying, you pick him up. and Einar's like, just let him do his thing, man. I love it. I love Einar just being like, I'm going to let him go. And he's like, come on. He doesn't say a word. He just grips Snake harder. And Snake's like, what power does this man have? Quite a bit. And that moment, my favorite part of this whole episode, I know a lot of people are going to say their favorite part is Canute, the chiseled face, the animation on him and Thorfinn's conversation, though him silencing the waves, everything. We'll talk about all that. Those moments are amazing. But my favorite part of this entire episode is the sun starting to set, and every warrior there who at the beginning of this fight was cheering and making bets and sneering and being snide and just like carrying on like a bunch of Vikings, they are silenced. And they are sitting there watching Thorfinn take those punches as Droat is like just barely able to finish. And it's just like that calm way. It's like, that's the thing. Canute put out his arm. Here's the thing. This is the thing that's crazy, right? Canute put out his arm and tried to calm the waves. And they calmed for a moment. And then they tumultuously went again. He's like, well, we can't defy God. And so we can't do this. We can't stop the waves. See, that mob surrounding Thorfinn during that battle was the tumultuous waves. And Thorfinn calmed it. And it didn't let back up. So I don't know if that's going to be something that comes up later, but the idea, Canute's going about it the wrong way, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. Canute's going about it the wrong way, but Thorfinn was able to calm the waves here. He was able to stop them. And he didn't have to send out his hand, he just had to stay there. He didn't have to send out his hand and command power. He just stood there and took it. And he didn't exert anything, he absorbed it. And it's just like, that moment is so damn beautiful. And I cannot rave about it enough, y'all. Them just standing there staring at him in the shadows. Not a word spoken. Except Droat doing the punches at the end there. When he gets to 100. And Olmar's crying. Like, of course Olmar's crying. Like, why wouldn't you be? Like, he's on the verge of tears. And Snake and Einar are just like, oh my God. He's like 99. And Thorfinn's barely holding on. And Droat's like 100. And it's just like, poop. That's it. And then poor Thorfinn's face. Like, his just face is massacred. Like, it's just, you know it looks bad now. It's going to look real bad in like a day. It's going to look real bad in a day. It's not going to be good. And everyone just mad respect. Just sitting there like Snake and Einar have like the long distance heart eyes like they've just, it's over. They've fallen. It's just, they've all fell for Thorfinn. It's over. How do we do this? And Droat sang Thorfinn, son of Thors. That recognition where he looks up at him. He says, I'm sorry I doubted you. You are a true warrior. He fought without a sword. Ah! Yes! And the moment he said he was a true warrior and he was talking about his enemies, I was like, oh, is he gonna do the thing? He is the moment. He's gonna do the thing. And then, yes, Thorfinn was the moment and he did it. And then what's so amazing is Droat's like, yes, we can confirm he guarded his majesty as we do. He has to be the real thing. Let him speak. And Wolf saying, why didn't you strike back? And I love Thorfinn's speech. He's like, beating Droat would have proven you're the former guard, so why didn't you do that? And Thorfinn's like, because. What kind of question is that? It's like, how dare you ask me that? I can't hit someone when I'm trying to negotiate for peace. So, we need to put some things on here, right? We need to put some things on here. We've got Thorfinn. We're going to put Thorfinn right here. All right? And Thorfinn's thing is that he says he cannot use violence to beget peace. So he's like, I'm not going to fight somebody that I don't even know to try to get an audience with a guy to negotiate for peace. I'd be a hypocrite. Canute. You know, that basically is what he's saying. He's like, I just met all of you today. So we don't know anything about each other. So he basically is talking about, he's like, when you meet people, you need to know them. You need to know them and understand them. Right? It says you need to know them and understand them. We don't know anything about each other. And so thus, we have no reason to hate each other. So why do we have to hit each other? It's stupid. He's like, why are we hitting each other? We don't even know one another. It's just Canute and Kettle who are feuding with each other. The two leaders could settle this over a game of Hinafatal, which is funny he mentions that game that just like, it's like a little thing pointing back to his culture. There's no need to gather all these men and shed blood. As far as he's concerned, he's like, the people arguing could have settled between each other with a game. He's like, we didn't have to have this battle at all. They could have just played a game and whoever won. He's like, this is stupid. He's like, it could have been solved in a much better way than dragging all these people out, making them fight, and seeing all these people die. He's like, what was the point of that? He's like, that was dumb. And I'm like, yeah, no, he's not wrong, right? He's like, why did we do this? And I like that Ulf is like, so that's what you think. And all these men are hearing that. He's like, we just met today. We are not enemies. And I was waiting for it. I was like, he's going to say the thing. And he sees his father in that moment tell him. And I love that his eyes kind of widen in that moment. Because I don't think he wasn't thinking of Thor's when he said, you are not my enemy. And then suddenly it dawns on him. He's like, that's what my father was trying to tell me. All this time, he's been trying to teach me that we have no enemies. That this is stupid. The fighting is stupid. There's no reason for it because we have no enemies. There's just people we know or don't know. And that realization, God, it's beautiful. When he just looks up and says, I have no enemy. Oh. Yep, I don't have any enemies. I love that moment. And Olmar's like, that is like a light bulb comes on for Olmar where he's like, this is what I've been wanting to hear from day one. Like, that's so beautiful, right? Yes. So, Thorfinn, I have no enemies, which is going to come back really good with Canute over here, right? We're going to talk about Canute with that. But yeah, Olmar's just like, I feel like, oddly enough, Askeladd, when he was talking with Canute and Thorfinn in season 1, he was trying to get at least one of them to come to realize that there is more to life and more to gaining power and using it than just starting battles. I feel like that's what Askeladd was trying to tell them, right? He thought that Canute, from what he saw of Canute initially, was going to live out what he was trying to teach in his own prerogative. He was like, oh yeah, Canute gets it. But the problem is, Canute kind of doesn't get it, right? And what's interesting is when he was talking to Thorfinn back at Stonehenge and was telling him about the Romans coming and saying, look, we don't have to do everything by fighting. And he was kind of hinting at like, hey, we can have an exchange of culture and get to know one another, and it doesn't have to be just violence and war endlessly. It can be, we're not all barbarians. It doesn't have to be that way. And I feel like Thorfinn is becoming this merger of what Askeladd wanted Canute to be and what Thor's his father wanted him to be. And he's kind of like merging into this interesting conglomeration of that. So it's so fascinating. But Olmar kind of has that same like look on his face like, oh. And yeah, Wolf's saying you're a bold man to reject war by surrounded by this many professional soldiers. Yeah, Thorfinn is many things, and yes, bold would be one of them. He's like, he's like, Kettle and His Majesty should just play a game, huh? And he's like, what's funny? He's like, you should tell Canute that yourself. I kind of wish he would. I wish that Thorfinn in the next episode, his last words to Canute are like, you should play this game with Kettle. Ha ha ha. And then they walk away. I don't know how that's going to happen. But he's like, he doesn't go to war because he wants to. Well, yeah, we're going to talk about that. But Wolf is saying, we're going to put Canute over here. Our boy Canute is going to go right here. Sweet, sweet Canute. And I'm going to put Wolf over here. We're going to put Wolf here. And Wolf says that Canute doesn't go to war because he wants to. Well, I'm going to disagree a slight bit with that because I think that Canute kind of revels in it now. Talk about it. We'll talk about it. He says, once you hear him and see what he has to say, you'll realize what's in his heart. Yeah, but, oh, yeah. So he's like, you're going to have to find out what's in Canute's heart. And I'm like, okay. All right, show. Sure thing, Jan. And Canute's like, okay. And so then they all get to go. And I like that Einar comes with them. He's like, don't you have things you want to say too? And Einar's like, yes, I do. And I'm like, I feel like Canute does not like Einar at all. Canute just like looks over at Einar and he's like, really? I feel like that Canute just does not like Thorfinn, does not like Einar at all. But okay, when they see all the people lined up and Einar is looking for Pater and Thorfinn's like, do not look for Pater. If you do, you're not going to be able to remain calm. And that's exactly right. And Thorfinn doesn't look either, because I feel like Thorfinn is saying the same thing of himself as he says for Einar. He's like, if we see Pater among the dead, we're not going to be calm. We got to be calm for the king. So just don't look, Einar. But that's such a tease, because it doesn't tell us whether Pater's alive or not. If he's not alive by the end of this, oh man, I'm like, I want Pater to be alive, but I think he's dead, but I'm just like, oh, that hurts so much. And then if you were thirsting for Canute, my friends, we just entered an oasis. We entered a Canute oasis at this part of the episode. The last 10 minutes are just like a banquet. Do you want Canute in every possible light? Do you want him doing his signature Canutisms? You're going to get him in this one for sure. And then what's so fascinating is that Canute and Thorfinn kind of change like styles. Like Thorfinn now has the very long flowing hair and Canute has the short hair where it's flipped from how it was in season 1. I'm really glad that Thorfinn kept his cool considering all the stuff with Askeladd that was brought up, which is fascinating. He's like, fine, I'll see him. I was like, the moment he said that very well, I was like, oh, sure. And then that's when Thorfinn comes up. I love it. They're over the sea. And I'm so sad that Canute can't see Thorfinn in all of his glory. His face is like a big old monster mash. I hate it. I hate it because there's Canute looking so princely and kingly, I guess. And then Thorfinn just looks like he's been through hell. I love that shot of their eyes though. The two eyes, like you have Canute's like icy blue eye and Thorfinn's golden amber eyes. Like it's like fire and ice. Oh, so good. I can sit here and gush all about from here on in this episode because it's so great. So he's like, oh, so you're still alive. I'm like, of all things to say first to Thorfinn, so you're still alive. Yep. It's Brittany, bitch. And then he's like, it's been a while, Thorfinn. I love it. And then he says, you must hate me for making you a slave. And then he says, no, for what happened to Askeladd. What's so interesting about that is that Canute thinks Canute is stuck in the past with Thorfinn, and he thinks Thorfinn is stuck in the past as well. And Thorfinn, I don't think Thorfinn even really cared about the scar or anything. He's like, no. Thorfinn, to show how much growth he's had as a character versus Canute. Like, Canute still is thinking about the past. Constantly. Constantly connecting to the past. Here's the kind of crazy thing. You have Canute constantly connecting to the past. About Askeladd, about God, about Thorfinn. Like, he is stuck in the past, right? And he is moving towards the future. Don't get me wrong. He does have his plans and his goals, but he's very much is constantly like embedded in the past. The fact that he talks to a disembodied head of his dead father who died 4 years ago confirms that. He is still stuck in the past. Whereas Thorfinn seems to carry the past sins, but is working towards the future. Seemingly, right? And Canute, you could argue Canute is as well, but Canute, I think, dwells in the past way more than Thorfinn does, at least in that regard, right? Outside of the weight of the sins that he has for the people that he's murdered. Because Canute doesn't really let those weigh in. God, that side look for Einar, I want to take a picture of it, is so good, where Einar just like looks over at Thorfinn like, Askeladd, huh? Like Einar realizing so many things in this episode that, one, Thorfinn has a past with the king. Two, they both know the same guy that presumably is the man. And Einar now knows that Askeladd is the man that Thorfinn wanted to kill. And so he's connected the dots being like, oh, the king's the one that killed the man that you wanted to kill. Oh, okay. Like Einar looking over like all of this is connecting. Like you've had some pretty high-end connections. I feel like Einar is questioning what he doesn't know about Thorfinn at this point and how Thorfinn's kind of kept it all close to the vest all these years. And Thorfinn says, I'm still alive after drawing a blade against Danish royalty. He's like, I can't really complain. I appreciate the consideration you showed me. Yeah, Thorfinn's like, hey, my feral self may have been complaining and kicking and screaming when I was dragged away, but he's like, you could have killed me. He's like, I drew my blade against the king. I could have easily died in that moment, but you did not kill me. So he's like, I guess I really honestly can't complain because you showed me... He talked last episode about Kettle and the others showing kindness to him, and about him wanting to repay that kindness. And I feel like in this moment, he forgives Canute. And he's like, you showed me kindness when you didn't have to. Even though that kindness was becoming a slave, it could have been a lot worse. He's like, so no. He's like, I get it. It's fine. He's like, I kind of, maybe deserved it in that moment. So Thorfinn shows forgiveness. That's the thing. Thorfinn shows forgiveness. And he's done that throughout this entire season, right? He's done that with Einar. He's done that with Snake. He's done that with Sverkel, with Kettle. Thorfinn has just been forgiving because he's like, life is too short to not do that, as I've learned, right? Whereas Canute does not seek or expect forgiveness. He flat out says, he's like, you don't have to forgive me. I don't care. But it's not treated the same way that Thorfinn treats it. Thorfinn treats it as, oh, you don't have to forgive me, but I forgive you. Let's be cool. Canute's just like, don't hate me because I'm beautiful. We don't like you either. One of those situations. And so he says then, I'm sorry about the scar on your face. And that's another thing. Just mentioning that gets Wolf to go, he's the man who scarred His Majesty's face. Excuse me? Like it's him? Thorfinn Karlsevne. We rarely get his full name said. So again, that notoriety, that's going to go around. You better believe that those men there that heard are going to be like, he's the one that gave the king a scar. Right? Because even Einar's like, wait, what? The man who's said to have been an even match for Thorkel in combat. I miss Thorkel. I miss him. I wish we could see him this season. I had no idea he was so small and young. And Einar's like, you drew a blade against the king? I love that Einar's like, I thought you told me everything, boo. You didn't tell me you drew a blade against the king. What? I just love that Einar's like, excuse me? Like he does the meme of the blinking. Yeah. And then Canute looks surprisingly humbled by that. Canute's expression is kind of like, It's the only time in the episode that Canute looks like his younger self. When Canute looks like his little baby face self is when Thorfinn says, I'm sorry about your scar. And Canute's like, well, you seem to be Thorfinn, but this is not what I was expecting. Also, it's so fascinating that Thorfinn, despite looking older, he just looks a little more like Thor's, and he's aged like a fine wine. There are some hard edges to Canute in this episode that you can argue it's really hot, but I'm like, we went from babyface, smooth, not a blemish or a wrinkle on us, Canute from season 1, to I got crow's feet. I'm starting to get hard edges and cheekbones like my dad. Like, he's starting to look more like his dad. And I'm like, Canute, that's not a good look on you. But yeah, it's so fascinating. And he's like, well, it's impossible to tell who you are with that face. I'm just glad he believed him, because I thought for a hot second Canute was going to be like, you're not Thorfinn. I was just going to send him away, being like, you can't be him. He's like, 4 years. It's already been 4 years. Enough time for a person to change. And Canute would know, right? He would know how that story goes. And so then we get down to the nitty gritty where Thorfinn is like, I'd like you to leave the farm. That's all he says. Thorfinn's like, I'd like you to leave. Just go. Get out of here. And Canute's like, no. He's like, I can't do that. And I like that. He's like, I like that Canute, Thorfinn is like in his Zen Buddhist mode where he's let go of everything and he's just like calm as a cucumber. And Canute is like in Frieza mode. Like Thorfinn is in Goku mode and Canute's in Frieza mode. And Canute's like, no, Kettle started this dispute. I'm not leaving. So, and I like his eyes narrow, like, do you expect me to be a fool? Like, I feel like he almost looks down on Thorfinn in that moment. He started this dispute. Kettle's son Omar killed 10 of my men because I wouldn't make him one of my thanes. Now, if I'm remembering correctly, I'm pretty sure that Thorgal had a pretty integral part in all of that, that you're leaving out words. You're leaving out words, Canute. You're tailoring the story to fit your narrative quite well. Because here's what he says. He says that Omar killed 10 men, so we are taking the farm. It's not unlike Snake's dispute with Gardar. Snake's dispute with Gardar was, oh, well, Gardar killed 5 of my men, so I have to kill Gardar. That's just the way that it works. And Thorfinn was like, we're not solving anything by you doing that. Nobody wins if you keep the cycle of violence going. Canute is making a very similar argument that Snake made a few episodes ago with his actions here. And Thorfinn's like, I heard about that. Thorfinn doesn't say whether it's true or not. Thorfinn's just like, oh, I heard about that. He doesn't say whether Canute's twisted the story or not. But you've made your point. He said more than 100 of the farmsmen have died. He's like, you know, Snake was trying to kill Gardar, who was 1 man for 5. You've killed 100 men for 10. You've done overkill. You've gone way beyond. This isn't just getting revenge. It's not just eye for an eye. He's like, you've done more than your fair share. You've done enough. He's like, it's not, you can't equate it anymore. Right? He's like, the region may not be able to recover now that so many workers are dead. And that's another thing too that Thorfinn points out. He's like, we're not going to be able to farm here probably for a while because you've killed half the men. Like, it's going to be a struggle. He's like, this is going to be hard. Like, you've decimated this region and left it where it's not sustainable. He's like, you've done enough. Go. He's like, and I don't think Thorfinn fully realizes at this point, Thorfinn doesn't realize that Canute is there to claim the farm for himself, for his empire. All Thorfinn knows is that Canute and Kettle got in an argument, and there's been a fight, and now Canute is coming to get Kettle to fess up and surrender. But Thorfinn doesn't know the whole plan, right? He doesn't know Canute's entire agenda. He just knows what he's figured out on his own. And Canute's like, I advised them to surrender. It's Kettle's fault for miscalculating the difference in the strength of our forces. Which is not wrong. It is Kettle's fault. Kettle drew the blade first. Yes. Canute is not saying anything wrong there. The battle cannot end until Kettle's clan has been dealt with. And Einar's just like, well, so Canute says that he offered surrender, but they cannot leave until the clan is dealt with. So even though he told him he was going to surrender, I'm like, is he going to kill him though? Is he still going to kill him? Like, dealt with? I mean, I guess that could mean he's going to exile them as well. But then Einar gets mad, and he's just like, in other words, it's not going to end until you've captured this farm. Basically. That's when they put 2 and 2 together. And I love Canute's face of, I don't like you. I love Canute's angry face where he's like, yes, I'm glad you figured it out, simple farmer. And Einar's like, make all the excuses you want. You can't hide it. You call yourself a king, but you're actually just a thief. I love it. I love it because, interestingly enough, and Einar doesn't realize it, but that's what Kettle called them thieves. So Einar, I'm going to put him right here. Einar calls Canute a thief. He's like, you just came to take something that wasn't yours. And he's like, that's not fair. You started this whole thing because you just want to take something away from us. He's like, that's not fair. And so I love the parallel of Kettle and Einar in this moment. It's interesting. How are you any different than the average Viking chief? And that's been the thing. That's been the thing. Canute's whole struggle is that he's been trying up until now Canute has constantly been saying, I'm not just like the other. That's what's so fascinating is we talk about characters changing over time. When Canute started his whole thing for Paradise, we'll talk about the whole God scenario because that's not changed. He's just doubled down on that. But at the beginning, Canute was like, I'm not like these other Vikings. I'm not like them. I'm different, and I'm going to go about a different means. And sadly, over the course of 4 years, he has not only become like the Vikings he says he doesn't care about, but he's become the king of them. And Einar brings up a good point. He's like, if you want to farm that badly, start one yourself and figure out how damn hard it is. He's like, we watched Vinland Saga for the last season, and we're like, we know how hard it is. He's like, you can't do it. He's like, graze your own crops. Figure it out for yourself. Then you'll understand firsthand what a terrible thing it is to take that from someone else. I love that line. I love when he tells him that. And Einar's right. He's like, do the work yourself to appreciate what you are stealing. He's like, if you raised your own farm, you would know how it is. You would know how difficult it is, and you'd have more empathy for the people that you're stealing from. Einar is making a point of saying that Canute has a disconnect from the people. Canute is not connected to the people. That's the thing. And that was kind of the whole deal with Harold and Canute, right? Was that the people really liked Harold, right? Because he connected with them. And Canute was kind of this outsider. And that's been like a whole thing as well, right? And so Einar is saying, like, you have no connection to the people themselves. So you don't know how hard it is. So it's, how can you come in and take things without understanding? And then Thorfinn says, Canute, you once told me at Gainsborough, and I love that we go back to this. He says that you build a paradise in this place, a utopia for those who suffer. That is the thing. Okay. Thorfinn is saying that he tells Canute that you said back at Gainsborough you wanted to create a paradise for those who suffer. He's like, you said you were going to create Vinland, basically. You were going to create this paradise for those who suffer. He's like, how is what you're doing now creating that paradise and helping anybody? He's like, it's not. How is this going along with your original goal? He's like, what has changed? Do you still believe that? And God, Canute smiling. The moment Canute smiles, I was like, we're going to crazy town. Get your Shakespearean villain caps on. We're about to start. I was like, yeah, because that's not what it's become. And I'm sure what Canute is thinking is, oh, Thorfinn, you sweet summer child, I was so naive back then. Like, I'm sure the whole time he was giving this speech to Thorfinn, explaining about him being the king of kings and everything, the whole time he was giving it, all I can imagine is that his dad's head is like floating around him in a circle being like, yes, Canute, tell Thorfinn this. He can't possibly understand the things you have to go through as king. Like, I was just waiting for his head to pop up. It would have taken us completely out of the moment. Wouldn't have been good, but I was waiting for it. I was like, oh my God, no. And you can just tell as he's speaking that he is imagining his father's head speaking alongside him. Like, I could just picture it, right? But yeah, he's just like, oh, well. And this is the meat. He's like, a chief, huh? Like, he just completely ignores Thorfinn's conversation and goes back to Einar because he doesn't want to answer Thorfinn's questions, right? Because he knows he's changed. And he says, indeed, I am the chief of Viking chiefs. He's like, I am the Viking of Vikings. So here we go. Canute saying that he is the chief of Viking chiefs. Completely ignores Thorfinn's question about the whole paradise for those who suffer. Ignores that for the moment. Says, I am the chief of Viking chiefs. And says that, I love the wind blowing up. I am the sovereign king, the most powerful Viking on the North Sea. And that moment, like his face being so chiseled and just gritty and dark, I'm like, he does not look like the beautiful, sweet princeling of season 1. He is he's dark and he's hardened. And it's not the same. It's like, oh my God. Mm-hmm. But he has to put on the show. He has to put on the show and the performance for the troops. But here's the thing. I don't think it's all a performance. No, I'm sure some people in the comments and some people that have reacted are like, oh, well, Canute's just putting on this performance. He really doesn't want to go to war. I'm like, are you sure? Because I think he does. I think he's drank enough of Daddy's Kool-Aid that he's kind of starting to twist into a version of his father. Not exactly like Swin, but a version of it. And Einar calls him out for it too. But he says, I'm the most powerful Viking on the North Sea. And Canute and Einar just looks so disgusted. Einar's like, oh my God. Einar looks like the guy that grew up in the country that like goes to see his friend's friend in the city and is just like, oh my God, you and your first world problems. I feel like you and your elitist problems. Oh no. Like that's the face Einar has during this whole conversation. The ruler of the largest territory in Northern Europe. Mm-hmm. The commander who leads 1,000 ships and 10,000 men. And I just like I don't think he's performing this. I think Canute legit believes his power exceeds human understanding and makes the impossible possible. So he believes that he has the power to make the impossible possible. Or at least that's what he says. Now, there is a part of me that believes that Canute is a bit drunk on his power, right? But there is another part of me that feels like part of this is a performance because of what happens next with the sea, where he holds out his hand. He says, with my power, I'll stop the waves. I love the way that they drew Einar with the hairbrush back. He looks a lot more buff than usual. And he says, in the name of King Canute Waves, I command you to stop. And they do for a moment. For a brief moment they do, and then they start back up. Which is kind of cool. I do love that. And then, did you bear witness to my strength? He's like, I am powerless to stop even the approaching waves. So, there is a moral to this. Like, he makes that big show and display and acts, somewhat cocky in the moment. But it's all a front to say that, yes, I am chief of the Viking kings, and I'm king of the Viking chiefs. And by that right, I should have all the power in the world. And he's like, and what he says is he's like, I can say how much power I have, but I cannot fight nature. Cannot fight nature. I cannot fight nature, and in parentheses, we're going to put God. What's interesting, he says, do you know what makes the waves? And I was like, the moon! The moon, the tide! But these guys don't have that science yet. He's like, do you know what drives those waves? And I'm like, the moon! And he goes, God. And I was like, oh, well, sure, I guess you can believe that back then. I like that Einar's just like, Einar's just had enough. He's done. I love it. And then he says, it's God. God drives the waves. Building a paradise on earth means defying his logic. So what he's saying is, essentially, there is a little performance there, because what he's saying is that to build paradise goes against the natural order of the world. It's going against human nature. He's trying to tell Thorfinn, he's like, it's human nature for us to fight battles. It's human nature for conflict. It's human nature for us to kill one another. That's just the way humanity is. And if you want me to build pace, he's trying to school Thorfinn and being like, I've learned in my worldly experiences that building the paradise of what I told you back 4 years ago means I have to defy God. And as you can see, I can't stop the waves. So how is that going to be possible? It's almost like he's telling Thorfinn it's not possible for him to build the paradise that he once told him about. And so he says it's an act of rebellion against God. Humankind cannot find happiness under God's rule. Which is such a fascinating statement, right? It's such a fascinating statement because the way he says is like what we're doing, we are doing an act of rebellion against God, and that humans cannot find happiness in nature aka God. Which is so curious, because I don't think Thorfinn believes that. I think Thorfinn does not believe in that. I think that Thorfinn thinks that no, there is a place for us to enjoy the beauty of the world. That's what Vinland is. It's a place where you can enjoy your freedom in the It's kind of like Canute is saying that he's under the presumption of what he learned in season 1, or what he thought he learned, was that the paradise that they were given, humanity squandered it, and so God doesn't care about how they're punishing themselves over and over again through the various violence, and that they're never going to get the paradise that they once had because of how humanity is and their sin. And so Canute's just like, screw it. And Thorfinn, on the other hand, I feel like Thorfinn believes that, no, we've been given this paradise. Why are we fighting when it's right here? It's right here for us to have. Why are we squandering it? And Canute's like, we have no choice but to squander it. So it's just that it's those two ideologies that are so different that are clashing, right? And then Canute says to Thorfinn, Thorfinn's just like, rebellion. He's like, what? He's like, look at us, Thorfinn. Look at us, Vikings. And he does the cape thing. He throws the cape back, does his Canutism where he tosses the cape aside, only it's much more hard and harsh. We're responsible for this chaos and destruction. We're fearsome raiders. Do you think we deserve to live in paradise? So, he says that the Vikings that he commands, the Vikings are raiders and sinners and cause chaos and destruction. Do they deserve paradise? So the paradise is becoming quite a different thing over the years, because Thorfinn's bringing up, he's like, well, you said you were going to create a paradise for people who suffer, and Canute is now like, we're creating all the people that suffer, so what paradise are we owed? We're not going to have paradise, so why would we create it for other people? And I'm like, oh my God. So yeah, so Canute's just saying, like, the Vikings are raiders and causes chaos and destruction. What paradise are we going to go to? And I'm kind of like Canute. The whole point was to create a paradise and to change the mindsets of the system. And I feel like what Thorfinn is trying to tell Canute is like, back when we were talking at Gainsborough, you seemed like you were going to change up the system and make that paradise. But now Canute's saying, oh, no. There's no chance for paradise. Not like things are now. Not like things are now. He's like, do you think we deserve... He's basically saying, like, with what we've done, no one is going to give us paradise for our actions. So what does that leave? He's like, I could build a paradise for the people that we've caused to suffer, but what's going to happen to us? And Canute is putting himself in that group with them because he's killed all these people. He's like, I'm down in the pit with them. Where's our paradise? Why would I work so hard to create a paradise for people that we can't even be a part of? And Thorfinn's like, well, Thorfinn's just like, well, wait a minute, what? He's like, basically, I can't create a paradise for the people who've suffered, because then myself and all of our men and all the Vikings are left out of that paradise. So it's not, he's like, I've learned a little bit since then, Thorfinn. It's not as easy as I once thought it was, nor is it something that can easily be achieved. He's like, but that's what humans are. He's like, committing sins as we wander lost is what humans do. And he has like all the images of all the battles and everything. And so we have that whole wandering in the wilderness that Canute believes. He believes that all of humanity, he's like, humanity is doomed to wander lost and in conflict. He's like, that's what we're doomed to do. And Thorfinn's kind of like, you don't have to wander lost. He's like, you can find your purpose in life. I feel like at this moment, Canute is acknowledging that, like Thorfinn and like Arnheid, he doesn't exactly know what to do. He doesn't know his purpose in life. And so all he knows is to go along with the status quo. And then we'll get to the paradise that he's talking about in a second. But he's like, the paradise I thought 4 years ago I could attain, he's like, I was naive. That was not something that could happen. And Thorfinn, I don't think Thorfinn's given up on that, right? That's what humans do. And then he tells, unless I save these people abandoned by God, I'll never be able to build a paradise. That's where the conflict is, though, for me, right? Because Canute, once he says this, he's like, I have to save the Vikings who have been abandoned by God to make paradise. That's my big issue with Canute, is that line right there. And Einar will address it here in a second. But my thing is that, yes, I get that your paradise for those who suffer, who does that include? Does that include the victims or does it include the Vikings? Because it makes it sound like back in Gainsborough that it included the victims but not the Vikings. And now that Canute has realized he is one of the Vikings, he is one that has committed the same sins, he's like, well, no, I can't just create this paradise willy-nilly, because what about the Vikings? What about all those? The people that I need to create the paradise, what happens with them? So he's saying, I have to save the Vikings who've been abandoned by God to make paradise. But his solution, I feel like Thorfinn's like, yes, you could save the Vikings, but this is not the way to do it. All you're doing is perpetuating the cycle. You're just digging the trench in the pit deeper. You're not helping them get out. You're just keeping them stuck there for eternity. He's like, you're not doing anything good with that, Canute. It's just not a thing. And then Einar, I love Einar's face. Einar's just like, the fudge is this? He's like, no, this is bullshit. I love, he's like, save the Vikings. And he's like, yes, that's what I intend to do. I am the only one capable of conquering them, ruling them, and unifying their strength. Bold words, sir. I feel like Canute believes, he's like, I am the only one. Canute is very bold. He says, I'm the only one that can conquer, rule, and unify. And he's like, once I've done that, well, then we can have our paradise, right? Right? Mm-hmm. And yeah, he tells them that he's going to unify their strength and direct them towards paradise. He's like, only by me leading them can I direct to paradise. But here's the thing, like, they're never going to get to paradise that way, Canute, because you're conquering and unifying. That's not ever going to happen. You're just in an endless cycle. I'm like, you are never going to conquer the world. So there's always going to be someone stronger than you come up. You're just going to lead these Vikings to nowhere. There is no paradise you're leading them to. You're just leading them until another army gets so fed up with you they decide to come in and wallop you. Like, it's not going to work, right? The long-term stability is not there. The sustainability is not built into that, right? You're doing nothing different than what's been happening the last how many years. He says, I need strength. I will unify the strength of all humankind to fight God. I'm like, he's making a bold claim. He's like, I'm going to take over the world and we're going to fight the forces of nature. And that's how we're going to build paradise. And I'm like, if he truly believes that, there's some delusion there, right? Against the sun, right? And then there's just like this silence. And Thorfinn's just like, Canute's an incredible man. I like that Thorfinn recognizes Canute is a very strong-worded individual. And then he says, it never even occurred to me to save the Vikings. I love that, right? What I love about that is that Thorfinn is like, oh, wow. He's like, I didn't even think about that. He was talking about save the Vikings. I feel like Thorfinn respects Canute because of how ambitious he is and how proud he is. And Thorfinn's realizing that Canute's whole thing, it's not against a person per se. Canute's enemy is not a person necessarily, but it's God himself. Canute's like, I'm going to defy... The title King of the Rebellion is Canute's rebellion against God's forces, the force of nature. He's like, I'm going to unite the world and we're going to create our own paradise. But I'm like, but then Einar comes in and Canute... And I like that Thorfinn, before we talk about Einar, because Einar has a whole thing to say, Thorfinn's like, he's like, I admire Canute for being bold and for thinking about the Vikings. He's like, I hadn't even thought about saving the Vikings. He's like, I've been saving myself, But I hadn't even thought about reforming that. That's what I think. I think Thorfinn is going to think on that for a long time. Like, how do I save the Vikings? And I think he's going to come up with a counter argument to Canute. And Thorfinn, admittedly, he's like, I'm not an educated man. It's going to take me a little bit. But I think Thorfinn is going to actively, throughout the rest of the season and into season 3, think about the ways in which he could, you know, try to save the Vikings in his own way. At least that's what I hope, right? I hope Thorfinn comes up with a rebuttal to Canute, because I think it's there. I think Canute's argument is flawed. It's got some issues, and I think that if anybody could think of a rebuttal to that issue, it would be Thorfinn. He could think of the way to counter that. But then Einar's just like, well, he's like, I'm going to knock this guy on his ass. I love Thorfinn's like, what an incredible man. And Einar's like, I'm going to kick his ass. Because, yeah, Einar's like, what a crock of bullshit. He's like, you're free to pursue whatever huge goals you want. He's like, you're no different than the men before you. He's like, you can do whatever you want, but who's going to save the people that you killed today for your goals? Who's going to save them? He's like, you're just into saving your own men, but you're not thinking of anybody else. He's like, when you say you're going to unite all of humanity, is it just the ones that support you and you're going to kill the rest? He's like, how does that work? He's like, no. Einar's like, well, you let the Vikings live because they can help you while killing and stealing from people who aren't useful to you. He calls Canute out on his hypocrisy real quick. He's like, you say that you're saving the Vikings, but that's just because they'll help you. He's like, they're only useful to you, and that's the only reason you keep them around. He's like, you want to get rid of Kettle because you thought you could take the farm and you didn't need Kettle. He wasn't useful to you anymore. So he's like, no. He's like, that's bullshit. He's like, you're just using people out of convenience for your own agenda. You're not thinking of the world as a whole. Building a paradise, my ass. And I love these, like, King Ethelred burned down my village and King Swin killed my family. He's like, they had lofty ambitions like you did too. They were no different. He's like, I don't care what their ideals were. The fact is they killed our people and they took our land. He's like, I've had enough. I refuse to suffer because of you. Yeah. Which is interesting because it's almost like because Canute feels like, it's an interesting conversation about God in this instance, because Canute kind of puts himself up on a pedestal like a god almost. He almost has a god complex where he's like, only I can do these things, He's being very light Yagami in this moment where Canute's like, only I can unite the people and I can create a paradise. So it's like, okay, Light, we're getting a little crazy there. And Einar's idea of acting in defiance of that is ironically exactly like Canute acting in defiance of God. Canute looked up at the sky and said, well, God, if you're going to treat us horribly, I've had enough. I'm not going to take this anymore. And that's exactly what Einar is doing with him. So the cycle just continues. Like Canute in the cycle, he's not breaking it. He's just becoming part of it. He's becoming part of the cycle that he hates. And Thorfinn's just like, what do I say? And Canute's like, hate me if you have to. I won't seek your forgiveness. He's saying the same thing Swin said to him, right? And it's almost like God looking down at Canute being like, fine, you can hate me, whatever. I don't know. It's repeating that cycle. And I feel like Thorfinn wants to break it, right? Because he's like, what did you say? And he takes off and Thorfinn's like, no. He's like, don't, Einar. He's like, no. And Einar, he's just so mad. And Thorfinn says, I'll ask you again. Do you really have no intention of leaving this farm? And Canute just like, no, I need the wealth for my undertaking. No, I'm not going to go. And I love that Thorfinn, that look of disappointment, that is the ultimate look of Thorfinn being like, I thought you were better than that. Like, Wolf talked you up. I thought you were better than this. What is the deal? And he's like, what will you do, Thorfinn? Will you kill me here? He's obviously not going to kill him. No. He's like, will you kill me here? And then he's like, you cannot stop me unless you kill me. And I think Thorfinn's going to be like, I beg to differ. Because he has that moment where he just glares at Thorfinn. Like, asking him, like, what's he going to do? And I love that Einar's like, really? And Thorfinn's like, really? Seriously, man? Like, we can't talk this out? Thorfinn's obviously not going to fight him. That's not going to happen. I love that. I love the look between them. That's so good. Ah, the two of them. And the sun between them. It's great. Yeah, I don't think Thorfinn is gonna fight Canute. I don't think that's in his MO at all. The question is, how are they getting out of this if he doesn't fight them, right? Is Olmar and Snake gonna come up and save them, and Olmar's gonna be like, we surrender, and leave him alone? I know Thorfinn has like a comeback for him. He's thinking of a comeback. I know Thorfinn wants to say something. The question is what? How is he? I feel like Thorfinn's gonna have the last word, no matter what the argument ends up being. I feel like Thorfinn is gonna have the last word in it and just leave Canute thinking about something. He's gonna do a ninja bomb, like a Dane Cook ninja bomb, and he's gonna sit it in Canute's head and be like, "Here you go," and then Canute's just gonna stew over it, right? I feel like that's gonna be the case, but I don't know. I don't think that Canute will want to take Thorfinn with him. I think that I hope Thorfinn gets back to Leaf. I'm like, you've been leaving Leaf hanging for like 20 years, Thorfinn. Get the hell back over there. For Leaf, go with Leaf and Bug Eyes and figure out what to do from there, right? God, we have 2 episodes left. And I don't know how it's going to end, but this episode was so good. There's so much to think about. There are a lot of holes in Canute's argument, and I think that Canute does his best to avoid those holes. He just doesn't want to talk about them. He doesn't ever really answer Thorfinn's question. He skirts around it. He gives complications to it, but at the end of the day, he doesn't really answer Canute's question outright. Like, are you still going for the same goal? And I think the answer is no, it's changed. It's evolved and developed in different ways, but I'm so fascinated by where this is going to go to from here. What a good episode, right? I feel like I rambled. I feel like I just went on a tangent. I feel like my thoughts are not articulating the way that I want them to, but I find the argument between Canute and Thorfinn so fascinating. And Canute's logic of that we can't change the wheel. I just have to take control of it. Canute's argument, honestly, and this is Attack on Titan spoilers as long as I'm holding my hand up, Canute's argument is Aaron's. He's like, I can't stop this cruel world from spinning, so I'm just going to take the wheel and control it. And then nobody can stop me, and I'll be able to make the paradise that I want with the people I want in it. And Thorfinn, meanwhile, is kind of becoming more like Armin, where he's like, but what if we didn't do that? But what if we didn't do that? What if we didn't destroy the world? I don't know. So maybe that's why I'm liking Thorfinn more and more. Maybe that's why I'm liking him more and more. But I don't know, y'all. But all I know is it's going to be a long wait again until episode 23. So in the meantime, I'm curious to hear your thoughts down below. I hope y'all enjoyed this reaction discussion. It was a long one, but I'm going to be excited to hear your thoughts. And then, yeah, we'll see what happens next week. So I hope y'all take care, stay safe, and I'll see y'all next week with episode 23 of Vinland Saga.